Hello, Lawyer Forward audience. Mike again. We are here with Chris White. He is a lawyer in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. And we're going to talk about that. First, remember that all of these sessions will be discussed and talked about and pinged around in the Lawyer Forward Facebook group. This is a callback to when we did our small group sessions at the live event. I want people to exchange ideas and to ping things around. One of the topics that was hottest every year was Cindy Vickers talking about how to practice in a small town because it is weird. There are big differences. What Chris has done that I'm really excited about talking about is he's applied some of the network principles that come out in the Lawyer Forward book to a small town practice, which is really close to home to me. So I am excited to have you here, Chris. How are you doing?
Oh, just fantastic. Millersburg, Ohio is the epicenter of progressive culture,
And you're
we like to say.
thriving in the basement during the
Absolutely.
apocalypse. This is like
It
if
is.
Walking Dead had lawyers in it. We're living that moment.
I could just barely see the field, so if I see them coming, I'll duck.
That's right. They're very slow. You'll be fine.
That's right.
So what are we talking about today, Chris? And correct me if I'm wrong. I thought this would be interesting to have a conversation that's sort of like, this is different than some of the other presentations, because we're going to sort of talk through a story. If you go through my book, it's a similar thing where like there's a big idea in there, but really there's this narrative of me figuring it out as I went, right? Like we were just making crap up as we went. And now it looks like in retrospect, hey, I had a plan all along. I did not. I assume you did not. So we're
Nope.
going to talk through your experience and the things you learned along the way. Is that a fair summary?
That is an excellent summary. I've a big fan of reminding myself every single day, we're just making it up as we go along.
Cool. Well, let's look in retrospect and pretend we had a plan. Go. Tell
Absolutely.
me about early days. You have a practice in rural Ohio, and that I believe your dad had that practice already for a while, and you jumped in later. Is that right?
Actually, he was a judge when we first got started. So for 21 years, my father, who's our senior partner, was a judge in what Ohio calls a common pleas court. So that's domestic relations, family law, felonies, all of those wonderful things. And so he had a wide range of experiences. In my first life, was a teacher. And then I went to law school because I had to pay penance for all the evil things I'd done in my life. And in the midst of that, we opened up White Law Office, originally just as him as a solo practitioner and me administrating and managing the office and clerking and, doing all that grunt work. And after I graduated law school and passed the bar, we reformed as White Law Office CO and
Which
have run
remind
that
me,
way.
you graduated about the same time I did. I think. What year did you graduate?
It was 2011 when I graduated.
Yeah. So total disaster, right? The
Absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
terms of jobs.
I started in 2008. So, I mean, I was
Right.
trying to sell a house in one place that we ended up sitting on for years. And,
Right.
it was all those wonderful things that go into that. But we formed together, and we formed as a digital firm. I would hesitate to say virtual, but we did form as a digital firm trying to lean into client management solutions, document management solutions that were less paper intensive than many other of our competitors in our market. And we had that benefit of just because we were a new firm. But after we reformed, we've run as him and I as owners together and partners together until the beginning of this year, when he won the largest case in our county's history by jury award and said, I love practicing law. I hate running a law office. Here you go. And he handed over the reins to me, and just in time to find out what it's like to practice in a pandemic.
Right.
So so that's kind of the structure of who we are, just from the very high level. But we started off just thinking we were going to be two attorneys, father and son, run as high speed, low drag as possible, and just serve our local community. There wasn't a great plan beyond that point in time.
Right.
What we found, though, is that Ohio experienced an oil and gas boom over this last decade. And we got into representing landowners against national, international oil and gas companies. And we ended up expanding from one county and two of us over that 8 years to regularly serving 24 counties. And I have 17 staff now, 6 attorneys who navigate and do that. So we grew exponentially faster than I was prepared. My undergrad was theology. and then I went to law school. I had no business acumen whatsoever
Right.
when it came down to that. But we, in the midst of that journey, there was a time when I was practicing, trying to run a law office, doing all those things making all those mistakes that you make as a business owner, trying to figure out what bills to pay
Right.
and what not. And I was in the middle of a 70-hour work week, sitting there staring at a pile of bills, trying to figure out what to pay, trying to figure out how to lead this growing team. And I just went, this sucks. This really just sucks. And I hate doing this. There has to be a better way to practice law, to run a law firm. And it really changed the trajectory of who we are as a firm.
Hmm. So
As the
if I can step
Yeah.
you back to that moment, it sounds like you grew faster than your systems grew, right? Like
Oh,
you
yeah.
you got to the
Absolutely.
point where you were like, we're all drowning, we're all in the churn, as I refer to it. We're just taking hours and doing more cases. But part of what put you in that cash flow positive position so that you could make some choices was that you followed demand a bit. Tell me
Right.
how that came about. How did you decide shifting practice areas or adding practice areas? How big of a jump was that for you?
It was not horribly hard at the beginning because we were fairly young. We were still agile enough to be
Right.
able to kind of make choices. It was one of those kind of, I read the tea leaves, looked around in the cup a little bit and said, I think there is going to be a need for representing landowners.
Mm.
And so we started on our own. And I have to give a massive nod because our attempt to do that put us on the radar of some large landowner advocacy groups, which is one of those was the Ohio Farm Bureau.
Mm.
And when you talk about networking, the Ohio Farm Bureau grabbed us and started deploying us to talk to provide resources to just be present at educational events for landowners. And so what happened was I would spend 2 or 3 nights a week out in southeastern Ohio talking to landowners at various churches or town halls or whatever, walking through this whole oil and gas boom. So we were, not only did we see an opportunity, but we really took advantage of the opportunities of the network, and the
Right.
Farm Bureau really stepped in. To this day, the Ohio Farm Bureau, and we aren't the only person it refers to, but it is the single largest source of referrals that we've received in our firm.
Yeah,
Our
I
website's huge, relationships are huge, but
right.
having that resource was amazing.
Yeah, I think it's really important in telling your story, talking about your experience and in what people are trying to figure out what to do right now. It is really important to think of these systems and how to manage your growth and all this stuff.
Yep,
Part of it is, at least in the traditional law firm model, and this is true of every business, you've got to figure out how to get cash flow positive. And
absolutely.
and a lot of that is really driven by responding to demand. So we've been talking about in different sessions in this conference how to identify. You don't want to switch practice areas per se, like try to capture the knowledge that you already have, but maybe apply it to a different audience, to a different need, to some other place. This is a weird moment that's going to cause a lot of shifts that many of them suck, right? Many of them
Yeah,
are just terrible. But some of them are opportunities if you can find them. And so you probably discredit yourself too much for this, but I want to give you credit for recognizing a need that created the positive cash flow that enabled a lot of the other things that happened for you.
absolutely. And speaking of that, I have a great friend. He speaks and coaches businesses across the country, named Kevin West, and he has this term called pivot. And I know it's not originally with him, but he talks about taking what you can do and pivoting that in a
Right.
new direction.
Right.
How do you take the most logical, easy steps and turn that in the right direction? And I love listening to him talk about pivoting, and that is a time right now. Um, I'm not an excellent source of saying do one thing. Our firm
Right.
does 24 distinct practice areas because we are a true GP firm.
Right.
I laugh because we have a very robust litigation team, but most of our firm is driven by dirt, dead people, and money. Real estate, probate, life planning, and small business contracts and in moving money around for folks. And so we have 24 distinct practice areas that our pivot during this time has been looking at our market of 60,000 people. That's what I have in my core market. 60,000 people that I sustain a couple $1 million firm off of, understanding that our biggest pivot was we have to get our brand out to a wider market.
Right.
We have to saturate. And so we actually had a business case plan 3 weeks done 3 weeks before everything kind of went to hell in a handbasket here, that was going to take us from 60,000 to 347,000 people as a population base that we could tap into and build our brand. But we wouldn't be able to do that hadn't we done all the work beforehand.
So we'll talk about that, because
Yep.
this distinction I think is really important, and you make this distinction between a law practice and a legal service provider, which I think is
Yes.
really interesting. And in the book, I talk about the difference between an expert-driven firm, expertise-driven firm, and a service-driven firm. Yours is certainly more that audience-building, service-driven firm, which is
Right.
why I thought this conversation was so interesting. So talk to me about that distinction between a legal practice and this services business.
Absolutely. So a law firm is filled with practitioners who are performing the art form of legal practice, where you've taken everything they've trained in, all this stuff they crammed in our heads, and then we're synthesizing that, putting it together, tearing it apart, and finding artistic solutions for people. And that's excellent. But business is a science. Business is not as much an art form where you're pulling things apart and putting them back together and finding a unique legal solution. Business has bottom lines, cash flow, profit and loss statements. It has hard data points. And so for us, we understood that as practitioners, we had to grow up beyond just the art form into the science of how do we provide that art form on a platform, on a brand that meets people's needs and provides accessible legal services to a largely rural marketplace.
Right.
And so that would be the differentiating point is not an art form of trying to just catch as catch can. It's a science of building a platform that provides access to those practitioners and their brains and their relationships and everything that's important about building a firm in a small community.
Yeah, the reason I love your story is because it makes it sound like I know what I'm talking about, which makes me really happy. Anything that confirms what I already believed, we're all wired to like that better. But one of the things I talk about a lot is the Daubert case, and that is how you pronounce it, I'm told, by the lawyer who had the case. But the Daubert case, just briefly, is the expert witness case, and it was basically you used to be able to be doctor, and you could sit up on the stand and look really cool and smart and testify to stuff, even if you weren't qualified to talk about the thing in question. And the Supreme Court took this and was like, we're not going to do this. We don't want just any random, just because the defense attorney or whatever can go tear that expert down, they still look like an expert because they're sitting up on the stand. We need to do the preliminary work of questioning the method. What is the scientific method that you used for your particular expertise? What I love about your story is that you looked at this situation and you said, we're going to be a legal services business. What defines a legal services business is not that I said it, right? It's not my credential. It's that I went out and did the method of a services business. So tell me, where did you learn this stuff? You mentioned that you had a theology background, but other than applying fasting and prayer to this, like how did you learn the method of this audience-focused entrepreneurial business?
Oh man, I have talked and asked so many people for their input. Most of my time was spent making those asks. Anybody who is in business, any business coaches, any other law firms over the past 8 years, I cannot even keep in my brain the number of people I've talked to in trying to figure this out. Some of them confirmed, I do not want to practice law this way. Right. They were traditional practitioners and they were running a law firm in a 100-year-old model that was just confirmation I did not want to. Right. Others were business advisors who really helped me learn. I will give massive credit to one person though. One of my first full-time hires in the ops team that I currently have is my chief financial officer. Irene came from the financial planning sector, and she had been doing a lot of that, had all our Series 7s and all of this, but she had studied and went in her undergrad was all in finance and economics. In the past 6 years, she has taught me literally sometimes in some of the most basic terms possible how to understand the science of running a business with metrics and accountability
Mm.
and solid projections. And in the meantime, she's grown into probably somebody that I would put up against anybody else in the country in understanding law firm finances.
Mm.
She has been within 2 to 3 points of predicting our budget for the last 3 years. And so, having that annual budget, keeping that annual budget up, keeping those metrics in place, that would be the single greatest contribution to me as an owner, was one, bringing her in because she knew what was going on and she was great
Right.
where I was not. But the second thing was, she is literally in sometimes fifth grade language, had to teach me how to understand this and run it forward. And after that, we have just begged, borrowed, and stealed from whatever industry we thought that is an amazing
Right.
idea, and put this together and homogenized it. So there's been so many missteps and mistakes
Sure.
along to making this model, but the one that we've reached, I am super proud of because the team has just come together around it.
Right. Well, let's talk about that because one of the things that I notice about you and that I've argued for is stop trying to do everything yourself. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like don't try to be everybody. And one of the things that really drives me crazy about so many legal conferences is you walk out of that feeling like I've got to understand everything about 1983 claims and also SEO and also
Right.
hiring and also like this huge list. It sounds like cash flow gave you the freedom to start hiring. How did you identify the gaps in your knowledge that you should deal with right away by getting somebody? How did you find people who filled those gaps?
That's great. Let me break that down into two responses. One, how did I figure out what I was good at? Well, it wasn't hard. I have very narrow skill sets. And,
Yes.
and
My I
I,
hate being moderately good at a lot of things. It's the
oh,
dumbest. Like
it's
I'd
so
rather be
bad.
great at one thing and know what it is and hire people. So I respect you.
There are so many things I'm not good at. And before we went on recording here, I told you my job at the firm is really show pony.
Right.
Parade out, talk about the firm, land whales, continue to boost the brand firm forward, move the business forward while I support my practitioners, what they're doing. And so what I did was I really said, what am I good at? And then when I started understanding what I was good at, I really just started fitting people in. The first was full time was my CFO. The second full time was my HR director, who is actually my wife. We worked together successfully. And then I hired an executive administrative assistant. She takes care of all our IT, tech, and physical infrastructure. In fact, she's written a 112-page handbook and policies and procedures for what we do.
Hmm.
And then the last one was my PR director, who took us from an average of 20 intakes a month to an average of 85 intakes a month
Wow.
in 2 years' time. And all I can say is every single time I spun off something I was doing into somebody's hands that was more capable, the firm lurched forward. And sometimes it was an investment. Sometimes it was going, hey, I have some cash flow. I can dedicate it towards this. But it wasn't a for sure thing that it was going to succeed. I didn't know that this was going to be successful until it actually happened. So it was investing sometimes towards
Right,
them.
but part of this, it sounds like, is you're not hiring. One of my big mistakes over and over was I would hire someone who was far less qualified than
Oh,
me at the thing, right?
yeah,
Because I was trying to save money because I didn't have the cash flow figured out. And so I was hiring somebody that I then had to train. I
right.
then had to spend all this time delegating to them. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're hiring people that were training you, right? Like they
Absolutely.
were
Oh,
high
yeah,
quality. You're investing in high quality.
absolutely. And that was the thing, is that investment in somebody who already knows what they're doing, because the reality of it was, and I'll say this with every bit of honesty possible, we spent the first year, my CFO and I did, undoing what I had done.
Mm.
Because that's the reality of it. I already didn't know enough to do it completely right. Fortunately, nothing that got me in any trouble, but still sloppy, just
Right.
not excellent. Bookkeeping, not great at it. And she tightened everything up. And then she spent the next year trimming the fat, going, do we really need this? Is this really good? And even this year, as we run into this COVID-19 scenario right now, she's actively already found a way to reduce our weekly need by $10,000
Mm.
a week. And I mean, I went, how did you do that? And she said, well, this is what I did and restructured. I
I
still don't
fired
know
you,
what she's
Chris.
doing.
You're out, Chris. That's what
That's
I
right.
did.
That's unfortunately, I will be drawing food stamps over the next 2 months. But no, that is absolutely a huge. Whether I'm talking to my small businesses that I advise, or find somebody who's better
Right.
at you than everything that you're not good at. Like you said, being mediocre at a bunch of things, it just isn't a way to go about running a business.
Yeah.
And so I just
And
happen
you're
to
able to
pull
do
them all in
this.
house.
You're able to do this on a small town revenue, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah,
you're pulling the revenue out of. So anybody who complains to me that you can't do this, trust me, if you can figure this stuff out in a small town, you can figure it out.
absolutely. I mean, my attorneys are really, because they're like the producers of our firm. They're the engines of our firm that do draw that out, because they have no need to focus on their marketing. They have no need to focus on their healthcare, because that's being handled. They have no issue to focus on the policies and procedures and how everything's happening. They practice, and they practice develop.
Right.
Those are the two main things that those attorneys do. And they really do make us more profitable. I mean, I have 2-year, second year, third year attorneys who are regularly billing $250,000 a year.
Right.
On a small town, a small community basis. And that's a lot of wills and a lot of deeds.
Right. Right.
So
let's talk about that. Once
right.
it sounds like you get the people in the right place. You let them do their thing, right? That you let them be good at what they're good at.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody do the thing they're supposed to do. And then that starts to set up, you use the term flywheel, which I think is is that a Coveyism?
Collins.
Or Collins, that's a good to great thing. Yeah.
Yep.
So once you get everybody in the right place, the system starts to kind of run itself. Talk to me about that phase. What does that look like?
Oh man, so much training internally, because what it is as practitioners, we have to untrain our way of doing it into the way the system needs to run. Because that was one thing in law school. We realized very quickly in law school, what seems like it should be the way it is rarely the way it actually is. And we got accustomed to that and thinking that it's not necessarily the obvious answer anymore. And in the same way, the business and practice of law, it's like, oh, if I just do this, it'll be fine. Well, we had to actually say, no, if you just do it that way, if you just write down your notes on a pad of paper when you're meeting with the clients, what happens when you get sick is we have no idea how to help that client as a team. And so untraining and doing the hard work of training ourselves into a uniform team-based collegial system that can rely on and support one another so that our attorneys can go away. They can leave for a week and everything continues to be happen. That gelling process, from the financial to the PR to the human resources to the infrastructure and policies, and to accomplish that vision of serving our community in some way. And then you add the practitioners and the way they practice. It was, oh man, sometimes a comedy of errors from communicating, from trying to get everybody on the same page, to saying, oh, well, the ops team says we need to do it like this. And the practitioners go, oh man, that does not work at all in actual practice. And so, fine tuning. I would not underestimate that it took us no better than 2 years to try and gel that team together, and everybody understands what's going on. And now everybody gets that if I make a fine adjustment to this screw here, it's going to make a ramification way out there. And so they work together really well as a team now, and trying to accomplish the unified vision of having a client-centered, accessible rural practice. And accessible means not just physically accessible on our satellites and our little different offices that we're in day a week, but now virtually accessible to folks in a lot of unique ways.
Huh. So your people now, it's not just the supply side in the sense that they're doing services. I'm assuming you've got similar systems for bringing new work in, right? Like you figured out how to use these people in the right position to be able to get new work as well.
Absolutely. Let me give a great example. Ken, Ken's been with me for almost 7 years now. He grew up here, local in our community, which has a massive Amish population. He actually grew up Beachy Amish. Went to 8th grade, speaks Pennsylvania Dutch, got his associate's degree, got his bachelor's degree, owned his own business, and then went to law school in his 30s. And he's now a partner of mine. But Ken, last week, in the middle of a shutdown, opened 10 new matters.
Wow.
And because we have put Ken in one position, get out, build relationships, and bring them to the firm. And then we support him behind that. But there's an intake process. There's the things that happen even when the first person calls in, that they go through the whole intake list with our intake people. Ken gets that, Ken then hands that off to his team, and often is now running to the next person. And that's just finding Ken's sweet spot where he's got great relationship building skills and great closing skills on new matters. Versus, let's say, Tom, who he's my dad, senior litigator. He maybe will land one case a week, but it's usually $150,000 estates that have massive problems that he's going to have to end up going to court, advocating for people. We're in federal court against a couple big oil and gas companies right now still. His stuff is much less impactful as far as new matters,
right?
But is long, multi-year tales of
because
litigation.
he's got an expert brand. I mean, in the sense of his daily practice, he's not practicing anything like you, right?
No, not at all. And that's, let's be transparent. I have like 4 or 5 clients now.
And I don't even like them.
No, they're good people. I love them. And they call me first thing. But most of my work is now done by everybody else.
Right.
I don't even practice that much anymore. And it's not because I don't like practice. It's because my skill set actually wasn't as the practitioner even.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a scary thing for a lot of
looking up in my book what chapter it is that talks about this. I love talking to you because it feels so warm and fuzzy. All right.
Confirmation bias.
Exactly. Confirmation bias feels really good. So one of the things with that, obviously, you start... I want to talk about procedures and policies and stuff and their effect in a firm like this. Once you start to get to a certain number of people, those people have to make choices, right? Like you can't systematize every choice. At some point, they've got to be adults making decisions. Tell me, I had some thoughts about this, but I want to hear your experience with this relationship between systematizing and then also trusting adults.
Absolutely. I will say that the core of how that functions in our firm is our culture. At the base level, it is the culture of our firm, that we are collegial. This is not dog eat dog. We support, we share work. Nobody gets it in and hoards it to themselves. Now there's the ethical autonomy that each lawyer has to represent their client in their best interest as they see forward. But beyond that, it comes down to our culture and our 4 main values of our culture that we defined. Man, we spent 8 weeks working on this 2.5 years ago. That it was honesty, empowerment, innovation, and respect. And that was those tenets, those pillars inside of our culture are why our team works so well together. When we solidified our culture, we actually lost 2 attorneys in 6 months because they weren't aligned with that. They didn't. That wasn't jiving for them. And there's nothing wrong with them in that. It just became painfully clear when somebody fits and somebody doesn't, because the culture is so well defined. And so when you have that culture of respect for one another, even though we have highly trained attorneys, one of them working on their PhD in psychology, and we have somebody who has a high school degree who's doing our intakes, there is no disparity there as people and individuals in our firm. This person is providing a vital role, and this person is bringing a vital asset.
Right.
But they're not doing the same thing, and they're both advancing because, quite honestly, when the client calls in, they want to talk to that person at the front desk more than they want to talk to this person back here.
Right.
And so this brand building is massive. And so there's this mutual respect. There's honesty, which took some time. That always takes time. When you have honesty and accountability and the ability to voice things, that takes missteps and working through it, and comfort with conflict and disagreement that is not always readily available with folks in a healthy relationship. And then when you're looking at trying to empower each other to accomplish your goals, it really comes back to our culture,
Right.
because we do have those strong systems and policies. I mean, we live and breathe. We use Clio as our client management system, and our administrative assistant says if it's not in Clio, it doesn't exist.
Right.
That is one of the baseline policies, that if it's not in a Clio node, it doesn't exist in the firm. And so, but when Ken's out sitting on the front porch of one of our Schwarzentrooper Amish, who are deeply Amish, no electricity, and they're sitting on the front porch because there's no lights in the house, and they're talking, Ken can't make a note right there. He can't make a note in Clio. And so
Don't
trusting,
ask the Amish for their Wi-Fi password.
no,
It's
you
not going to
can't.
get you far.
And you might not even have LTE out in some of those areas.
Yeah.
So you would not even, but you trust that Ken's going to make physical notes, and he's going to get back and he's going to give it to his team, and it's going to get in the system. So there's that trust that that's going to happen.
Well, but I think, we had a session with Allison Williams talking about how to, reduce everything to a system. And we've also had conversations about the dangers of that. And if you systematize people too much and they don't have creativity, it can be a really grating job for them. This seems like a conflict, that you want to systematize things, but then just you need people to be able to make decisions.
Absolutely.
The way I like to think about it, and this might resonate for you, is thinking about scripture, right? Most books of scripture, and I've studied many. I've got a Middle East studies degree, went on a Mormon mission to Italy, for Pete's sake. I've studied a lot. The way scripture is, ideally works, as I understand it, is it's a text that's not a rule book, but it's, here's what life should look like. Now, I want you to go apply it. I need you to go live it. And these systems, I'm assuming, that you have in your office that are policies and procedures, they're less tests than they are culture creators.
Right.
And once that culture is embedded, now you can trust those people to even go against the policy, right? And come back and in a follow-up report, in an after action conversation, say, here's how I think we should change this policy. Because now now you've got both the good of the people and of the system, thinking of it that way. Does that resonate for you?
Absolutely. And I think the danger we fall into when systematizing inside the law is that the law is so rigid and immovable that sometimes we translate our legal training to a business environment. And while business environment is science-based and has hard data that will drive it, it's actually far more agile than the law if you allow it to be.
It's freaking people. It's complex people in a complex environment. And guess what? Your clients are complex people in complex environments, right? You could not possibly predict every outcome, but you can certainly set guidelines, right?
Absolutely. We build the scaffolding, and then we
Right.
move it as we need to move the scaffolding. That was one of those things I already said, is sometimes the ops team would say this works systematically the best, and the practitioners would go, that's not how this is going to work in practice. And then they would have to adapt and mold, and something new would come out of that didn't exist previously in either one of their minds.
Right.
And so that's the innovation component of our culture, is not just are we innovating in how we deliver it, but are we innovating internally in how we exist alongside of one another and make successful policies that are all aimed at not the practitioners, not the owner, but at the client. Right. How is that client having an amazing experience with us? And I would really, and I give a shout out to Jordan on this, my PR director. He started doing NPS scores, and we got kickback when we first started doing NPS and asking for feedback, because that is a little bit of a lawyer's brain of, why are you telling me how to practice law? You don't know anything, client. Right. But it gave us such positive feedback and such good places to talk about when somebody wasn't happy, that it actually refocused our entire team around that client-centered focus. And we hold on average about an 80% NPS score as a law firm right now, with an industry at 35.
Insane. Yeah. That's insane. So NPS, if you guys don't know, is a net promoter score. It's basically you're asking people a very simple question: would you refer us to your family and friends? And they rate it on a score of up to 10. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a 9 to 10, that's a positive. If you're whatever the mid is, it's just a neutral. And then the lower numbers are negatives. And I think the 0 point is the full neutral. And then up to a score of 100. So really, I mean, 80 is like you're getting into Amazon territory, like crazy high. So, but let's talk about adaptability, because
Sure.
we're in this moment where we've got to look at costs, right? We've got to
Hmm.
look at employee costs. We've got to look at cash flow. It's not clear in some ways how long a recession that is likely is going to last, and dealing with cash flow. You were dealing with early, post 2008 stuff, but I think it's probably fair to say you've never been through something quite like this.
No, no.
How are you adapting to this? How are you changing your cash flow model and looking at your expenses differently?
Oh, I mean, there's no sacred cows. That's the first thing when it comes to looking at budget, when it comes to talking about what's on the table and what's not. Everything, everything's on the table. And there are creative solutions, from deferring, for the health insurance benefits that we provide to our clients, to deferring those for the 3 months that we were able to get the deferment for, to approaching some of our landlords, because we've got a lot of small satellite offices, just saying, hey, we're going to get caught up with you, but I need a little bit of breathing room while people are not rushing to the office during a pandemic
Right.
to see us, to even looking at partner pay, looking at, Ohio is fortunate enough to have a shared work program where we could, if we need to, which we haven't had to yet, scale everybody back 25% on pay, and Ohio would make up 12.5% of that
Uh,
and back. So looking at and being aware, obviously looking at the SBA 7A loans or the Triple P loans, the economic injury and disaster loans. We're doing this. We're doing all of that.
right.
I'm doing that because I've told my team that as part of the surviving this season, I have 3 points of agenda. One, survive with the team in place as it is. Two, expand into the markets that we had planned to expand in before we before all this happened. And three, come out of this as the most robust competitor in our markets. I have
Mm.
some of my competitors who are already down to 50% time with their teams, and
Yeah.
we're still at 100%. We still have everybody working, yes, from home, but we still have everybody engaged. We still have everybody going. And so what I put on the chopping block is anything that can help us accomplish those three goals, and the agenda is everything. So making asks, looking hard at the budget, working with my CFO to say, what can we get deferred? What can we work on? Where can we create space to have that buffer zone? And the full understanding that she's so good at the numbers and the cash flow that we know this month is not any time I'm going to have to make those decisions. Now, next month, maybe.
Mm.
Next month, based on this month's production, we'll see where we end up for that. But when you're really, I sympathize with a lot of practitioners who during this time, it's really uncertain. You're
Right.
almost back to when you open up because you're not sure when the phone's going to ring next. You're not sure
Right.
who's going to call in. Now, fortunately, last week we had 13 brand new matters come into the firm. And so that's great. I don't know what we'll end up with this week, though. It's so fluid that
Sure.
every day we have to make decisions and be adaptable to that. And I really like that term, adaptability,
Yeah.
because the more you can be willing to yield to what is going on around you and modify and grow and overcome, the easier it's going to be to make it through this time.
Well, and I think it's important. Um, it's fundamental to me to make the distinction between whether your firm is trying to be an audience-focused solutions engine that's responding to consumers versus an expertise firm where you're a smaller, you're really nerding out, you're doing very different activities. I think it's important that for your firm, which is more this audience build, you've got your dad who is doing
Yeah.
expert work, but your firm is really point of sale, right? Your firm is
Yep.
very much at the consumers and responding. This thing that you've learned of this agility is fundamental to the way that model works. It is responsive. It is design driven. It's a solutions engine is the term that I use. And so I I say that to say not everybody who's watching this is going to be that kind of firm. Some of them just want a lawyer all day and they just want to be super nerds, and
Yeah.
that's a different method. But I wanted to present this as a way to say this method works. There are principles that you can learn that you can put into practice, just like that Dalbert case, that you can do the scientific method of this kind of firm So I appreciate that perspective. If somebody wants to follow up with you about, maybe talking about how to adapt, what else you're doing, what are you trying, what are you doing with your staff, what have you learned about the PPP loans? Because I guarantee you, even when this comes out next week, there will be no money anywhere.
I know,
This is
I know.
taken forever. But tell me, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The website is absolutely the best. It's thewhitelawoffice.com. Big, long web title there. And then my information's on there. Facebook is good if you go to the White Law Office Facebook page. I apologize. We are a rural community. Facebook is still the pinnacle of our social media platform. Not a lot of tweets coming out of Millersburg, Ohio.
Right. Which is
But
a real shame.
it is. But we use Facebook fairly heavily in the firm because that's the medium our folks are still on.
That's right.
Pretty heavily. So those are the two places I'd go if anybody wants to reach out. And I would absolutely honor any request to just brainstorm and chat with folks. I don't claim to have all the solutions, but I really do like thinking through possible ones.
Well, I appreciate that. And remember, you guys who are watching, we're going to set up a conversation around this conversation in the Lawyer Forward Facebook group. We'll have a time that I'll be available. Different members of the group will be available. Hopefully, Chris will be able to be there to just ping ideas around for a couple of hours. And if you're watching this into the future, make sure you go back to the Facebook group, see if you can find that conversation and join it, right? You can jump in and ping ideas around. It's really important that we talk to each other, right? Pass on that generational knowledge and all the things that we're trying. We're all freaking making stuff up as we go. So
Yeah.
Thank you again, Chris, for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you in the group, brother. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.